When the Edmund Fitzgerald sank, rescue teams searched for days but found no bodies. People said it was strange. Usually drowned victims float back up after a few days. But Lake Superior is different. The site became a protected underwater grave with million-dollar fines for trespassers. But why would they do this? What did they know that the public didn't? The answer lies in what divers discovered in 1994. The freezing water had preserved them in ways that shocked everyone. When the Edmund Fitzgerald first touched the water in June 1958, people were amazed. At 729 feet long, it was the biggest ship ever to sail the Great Lakes. It was only 1 foot shorter than the maximum limit allowed for the St. Lawrence Seaway. For 17 straight years it carried taconite, iron or pellets from Minnesota to big industrial cities like Detroit and Toledo. People called it the Mighty Fitz because it wasn't just large, it was also fast and reliable. Captain Ernest Msori, who had over 40 years of experience sailing the Great Lakes, was the man trusted to lead it. By 1975 he was 63 and getting ready to retire after that season. But before stepping away from the lake forever, he agreed to make one last trip. On November 9, 1975, the Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin, carrying over 26,000 tons of taconite pellets. The ship was heading to a steel mill near Detroit. It wasn't alone on the lake that day. Another freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, joined the journey. Together, the two ships moved across Lake Superior. But the calm didn't last long. By the next day, November 10th, everything had changed. A powerful storm began building over the lake. These storms are common in November and are feared by sailors. Locals even call them the witches of November. This one was especially bad. Winds reached near hurricane strength. Some gusts were recorded at 86 miles per hour. The waves swelled up to 35 feet high. The ships were being tossed around like toys in a bathtub. As the day went on, it became clear that the Fitzgerald was in trouble. Captain Surley radioed the Anderson with a voice that still sounded steady, but his message was terrifying. He said the ship had a bad list. That means it was leaning to one side. He said both radars were lost and waves were crashing heavily over the deck. He added it was one of the worst storms he had ever faced. The Fitzgerald was now basically blind without radar, and water was likely leaking in. Surley and the Anderson's captain tried to steer both ships toward Whitefish Bay in Michigan. It was the nearest safe spot, but they were running out of time. At around 7:10 p.m. on November 10th, the Anderson asked how the Fitzgerald was doing. Surley calmly replied, "We're holding our own." Those were his final words. Just a few minutes later, the Andersons' radar showed something unthinkable. The Edmund Fitzgerald had disappeared. No one saw it sink. No mayday signal was sent. One moment it was there, the next moment it was gone. In just minutes, the mighty 729-foot ship and all 29 men on board vanished into the dark waters of Lake Superior. Not a single body was ever found. The ship's remains were later discovered on the lake bed, broken in two. But to this day, no one knows exactly what caused it to sink so fast. The Edmund Fitzgerald was never seen afloat again. It was as if the lake had swallowed it whole. When the Edmund Fitzgerald went silent, the crew of the Arthur M. Anderson knew something was terribly wrong. Even though the storm was still raging and the winds hadn't calmed, they turned around and headed straight back into danger. They weren't going to wait. They hoped someone might still be alive. That same night, the U.S. Coast Guard launched a massive search. They asked every nearby ship to help, even though the weather was so violent that many were afraid to go near the area. Planes flew low over the waves and boats crisscrossed the last known location of the Fitzgerald in eastern Lake Superior. But as the hours passed, all they found were pieces, broken lifeboats, torn up rafts, scattered life jackets floating in the icy water. Not a single body was ever found. Not one of the 29 crew members made it home, and that hit everyone hard. The lifeboats told a chilling story. They weren't neatly set in the water. They had been ripped from the ship and smashed apart. That meant the crew never had time to escape properly. It was all too fast, too brutal, too final. For days later, on November 14, 1975, a Navy P-3 Orion patrol plane flew over Lake Superior. Its equipment picked up something deep below the surface, a strong magnetic signal. The exact spot was about 17 miles northwest of Whitefish Bay, close to the Canadian border. When sonar scans followed, the truth was clear. The Fitzgerald was down there, broken in two. It was sitting at the bottom of the lake, 530 foot underwater. The front half of the ship was resting upright. The back half had flipped over. Between them was a trail of twisted steel, cargo, and debris stretched across the dark lake floor. It looked like the ship had split apart as it slammed into the bottom. It was more violent than anyone had imagined. After the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared in November 1975, people wanted answers. How could such a huge freighter just vanish in the middle of Lake Superior without even sending a distress call? The U.S. Coast Guard began an official investigation trying to figure out what went wrong. In the end, they said the ship's cargo hatch covers might have failed during the storm. That would have allowed water to pour into the cargo hold, making the ship dangerously heavy. Some experts believed the ship took on so much water that it went nose first into the lake, which might explain why the wreck was found in two large pieces, but other people didn't fully agree. The National Transportation Safety Board thought maybe the ship hit a shaw or broke apart. On the surface, some believed it was a mix of problems that came together that night. Even now, no one knows for sure what exactly caused the ship to sink. What they do know is that it happened fast. Whether it split open